Sir, you need to leave. Now. At exactly 8:42 p.m., two security officers grabbed Daniel Reed by the arms in the center of the Grand Meridian Hotel lobby. Guests froze mid-conversation. A crystal chandelier glowed overhead. Phones lifted quietly into the air. Daniel didn't resist. He stood tall, dressed in a navy suit, leather briefcase still in his hand. "I'm a registered guest," he said calmly. "Room 1812. The head of security, Mark Ellison, didn't blink. "We've had complaints. You've been harassing guests and refusing to identify yourself." A murmur spread across the marble floors. "Harassing?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "I showed ID at the front desk. I have a key card." Mark nodded toward the front desk manager, Susan Harper. She avoided Daniel's eyes. "We're asking you to leave before this escalates," she said, voice rehearsed. Daniel looked around, every face watching him, some confused, some uncomfortable, some pretending not to notice. "On what grounds?" he asked. "You don't appear to be a guest," Mark replied flatly. That sentence landed heavier than the grip on his arms. Daniel slowly pulled his key card from his pocket. It slipped from his fingers and skidded across the polished floor as security tightened their hold. Gasps. One of the officers pushed him toward the revolving doors. Cameras flashed. Someone whispered, "What did he do?" Outside, the night air felt colder. The doors shut behind him with a soft mechanical click. And inside the lobby, unseen by Daniel, something small and overlooked remained sitting at the front desk. If you appreciate stories that reveal what really happens behind closed doors, stay with me. Because by morning, that small detail would cost the Grand Meridian Hotel $12 million. "Call the police." The words came from inside the lobby just seconds after Daniel was forced onto the sidewalk. Through the glass doors, he could see movement, security speaking into radios. The front desk phone lifted again. Daniel stood still. People exiting the hotel gave him cautious looks. A couple walked past quickly, whispering. A valet avoided eye contact. Daniel slowly straightened his jacket. "I didn't do anything," he muttered to himself. 10 minutes earlier, he had walked into the Grand Meridian like any other guest. He had flown in from Chicago for a private investment meeting scheduled the next morning. The hotel had confirmed his executive suite 2 days prior. He remembered the check-in clearly. "Welcome to the Grand Meridian," Susan had said with a polite smile. "May I see your ID and card, please?" He handed both over. She typed, paused briefly, then forced a smile. "You're all set, Mr. Reed. Room 1812. Nothing unusual. No tension. No raised eyebrows." But when Daniel crossed the lobby later to meet a colleague for coffee, he felt it. Eyes following him. A guest clutching her purse tighter. A quiet whisper near the elevators. Then security approached. Now red and blue lights reflected off the hotel's glass entrance. "Police." An officer stepped out of the cruiser. "We received a report of a disturbance." Daniel raised his hand slightly. "I'm a guest here." Mark walked outside to meet them. "He's been causing issues in the lobby. Refused to cooperate." Daniel stared at him. "That's not true." The officer turned to Daniel. "Do you have ID?" Daniel reached slowly into his pocket. Empty. His wallet, still sitting on the polished front desk counter. Inside the hotel. "Sir, step back." The officer's voice sharpened the moment Daniel reached toward his jacket again. "I'm not reaching for anything," Daniel said carefully. "My wallet is inside. I left it at the front desk." Mark crossed his arms. "He's been changing his story." "That's not true." Daniel shot back, the first crack in his calm. A small crowd gathered near the hotel entrance. Someone began recording openly now. The flashing police lights painted Daniel's face in red and blue. The officer studied him. "You're saying you checked in?" "Yes." "Room 1812. My ID and credit card were handed to the front desk." "Ask her." Inside the glass doors, Susan stood frozen behind the counter. She could see everything. The officer signaled toward the entrance. "Let's verify." Mark stepped in front of him. "We already checked. There's no Daniel Reed registered tonight." Daniel's stomach dropped. "That's impossible." The officer looked between them. "Sir, if you can't verify your stay, we may need to detain you until we sort this out." The word detain hit harder than being escorted out. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. He thought about the meeting in the morning, the investors flying in, the contract sitting in his briefcase. I have confirmation emails, he said. On my phone. Then show us. Daniel unlocked his phone with steady hands and pulled up the reservation email. The officer leaned in. Mark's face tightened. The confirmation number matched the hotel's system format perfectly. For a second, no one spoke. If you're wondering how this unfolds, pay close attention, because what happens next inside that lobby will change everything. The officer looked at Mark. Let's go inside and check again. And this time, they weren't alone. The revolving doors spun fast as the officer stepped back into the lobby. Pull up the reservation, he told Susan firmly. The tension shifted. Guests pretended not to watch, but no one moved. The room felt smaller now. Susan's fingers trembled slightly over the keyboard. I already checked, she said quietly. There was no active booking under that name. Check again, the officer replied. Mark stood stiff beside them. This is unnecessary. Daniel walked in behind the officer, no longer being held but still surrounded by tension. His briefcase felt heavier now. Susan typed. The computer screen reflected in her glasses. Nothing. She searched again. Still nothing. I don't understand, Daniel whispered. I confirmed this 2 days ago. Sir, the officer began carefully. If the hotel can't verify your stay, this becomes a trespassing issue. Daniel felt heat rise in his chest. You're telling me my name just disappeared? Mark stepped forward. We followed protocol. Daniel looked directly at him. Protocol doesn't erase reservations. The officer turned to Susan. Was there any system update tonight? She hesitated. Mark shot her a sharp look. Yes, she said finally. We had a database refresh at 7:30 p.m. Daniel froze. What kind of refresh? The officer asked. Susan swallowed. It automatically flags duplicate bookings. Daniel's voice lowered. Duplicate. Susan clicked deeper into the system logs. Her eyes widened. There was a second reservation created at 7:38 p.m. under Daniel Reed. The officer leaned closer. And the system marked one as fraudulent. Silence. Mark's jaw tightened. The officer asked the question that shifted everything. Which one did it delete? Susan's hands stopped moving. The one made 2 days ago, Daniel's reservation, and the one made at 7:38 p.m., paid in cash, under his name. That's not possible. Mark's voice cut through the lobby as Susan slowly turned the monitor toward the officer. 2 reservations. Same name, same hotel, same night. One made 2 days ago with a verified corporate credit card. The other created at 7:38 p.m., paid in cash. And the system had automatically flagged the earlier one as suspicious and removed it from active bookings. Daniel stared at the screen. Someone used my name. The officer's expression shifted. This was no longer a simple trespassing call. Do you have identification? He asked Daniel again, but the tone was different now. Daniel exhaled slowly. It's in my wallet. On this counter. All eyes turned. There it was. Black leather. Still sitting beside the card reader where he had checked in. Susan picked it up carefully and handed it to the officer. Driver's license. Corporate ID badge. Everything matched. The officer looked at Mark. Why wasn't this verified before you escorted him out? Mark stiffened. We acted on the system alert. You acted without confirming ID, the officer corrected. Daniel's hands trembled slightly now. Not from fear, but from something deeper. Humiliation. Anger. You pushed me out in front of a crowd because of a computer glitch? He asked quietly. Susan shook her head slowly. It wasn't just a glitch. She clicked again. Security footage filled the screen. 7:36 p.m. A man wearing a baseball cap approached the desk. Spoke briefly. Handed over cash. Used the name Daniel Reed. The officer leaned closer. Do you recognize him? Daniel's breath stopped. Yes. It was the same man who had been standing near the elevators, watching him earlier. And now that man was nowhere in the hotel. Gone. Using Daniel's name. Leaving him to take the fall. But that wasn't the detail that would cost the hotel $12 million. That detail was still buried in the footage. Zoom in. The officer's voice was steady, but the room had gone silent. Susan enlarged the security footage. The man in the baseball cap leaned casually against the counter at 7:36 p.m. He slid folded cash across the desk, smiled, said something that made Susan nod. Mark shifted uncomfortably. "Turn the audio on," the officer said. Susan hesitated. "Lobby cameras don't usually record sound." "Usually?" Daniel asked. She clicked again. A small audio waveform appeared. "We upgraded the system last month," she admitted. The recording crackled softly. "Man in cap. Just book it under Daniel Reed. He's already checked in." Susan's voice on the recording sounded unsure. "Sir, I can't duplicate a reservation like that." The man lowered his voice, but it was still clear. "Trust me, he won't complain." Then something else. Mark's voice. "Just override it. We'll sort it out later." The lobby froze. Daniel felt the air leave his lungs. The officer turned slowly toward Mark. "You approve this?" Mark's face drained of color. "It wasn't like that." The audio continued. "Susan, the system will flag one as fraudulent. Mark, then let it flag his." Silence swallowed the room. "If you're still listening, stay close, because this is where everything flips." Daniel's humiliation replayed in his mind. The escort, the whispers, the flashing lights outside. "You let the system delete my reservation," he said quietly. Mark said nothing. The officer's tone hardened. "Why would you risk that?" Mark swallowed. The man said Daniel Reed had been bothering guests. "I thought it was safer to reset the booking." "You thought," Daniel repeated, but there was one more frame in the footage. Susan rewound 5 seconds. The man in the cap turned slightly toward the camera. Clear view of his face. The officer leaned in. "I know him." And that recognition would turn this from a hotel mistake into something much bigger. The room felt impossibly small, the weight of the revelation pressing down. The man in the cap wasn't just any stranger. He was a known fraudster, someone the police had been tracking for months. And suddenly, everything made sense. The reservation, the insistence, the subtle manipulation. Daniel rubbed his temples, trying to process the evidence. "So, I wasn't the problem." His voice cracked. The officer shook his head. "No, you were the mistake." Mark's knees buckled slightly. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to salvage dignity, but there was none left. I didn't think." "You didn't think?" Daniel echoed. "You didn't check? You just let them drag me out." Susan adjusted her glasses, her hands trembling. "We all saw the footage differently. I didn't realize." The officer held up a hand. "Enough. What matters now is fixing it." Daniel felt a flicker of hope. The audio, the footage, the one small detail, the fraudster's face, had changed everything. This wasn't just a misunderstanding anymore. It was proof. Clear, undeniable, and damning. "Let's contact the press," the officer said. "They need to know how wrong this went." Daniel's phone vibrated. Notifications poured in, messages from friends, emails from news outlets, social media alerts. Overnight, the story had already begun spreading. The moment had turned viral, and now the truth was unstoppable. Mark swallowed hard. I'll cooperate. Everything you need, I'll." Daniel didn't respond. He was watching the clips again, seeing the injustice that had nearly destroyed him finally exposed. The anger, the fear, the shame, it all came rushing back. But there was a difference this time. He wasn't alone. Evidence, witnesses, and that one overlooked detail, the man's identity, had given him leverage. The officer turned to Daniel. "You want to make sure this never happens to anyone else?" Daniel nodded slowly, a quiet fire in his chest. The phone buzzed again. Another alert. This time, it wasn't just the news, it was the beginning of accountability. And then, Mark's face went pale. On the screen, the fraudster's image appeared again, this time being led into custody by detectives. Daniel's stomach dropped. But it wasn't dread this time. It was the relief of watching the person responsible finally face what he deserved. He exhaled. The nightmare was far from over, but the tide had turned. By dawn, the entire town was awake to the story. News vans lined the streets outside Daniel's apartment, their satellite dishes pointed like mechanical vultures. Reporters buzzed with questions, cameras flashing, lights glaring. Social media had exploded overnight. Hashtags, live streams, trending posts, all focused on a single question. How could this happen? Daniel stood at the window, sipping bitter coffee, trying to steady his nerves. Every alert on his phone was another piece of the truth finally breaking through. Mark had been questioned, the officers involved suspended, and the fraudulent man, whose identity had been the one overlooked detail, was in custody. It all came down to a single piece of evidence, a time-stamped security camera from the gas station across the street. That one frame, showing the fraudster sneaking past unnoticed, changed everything. Without it, Daniel would have been just another victim in a quiet injustice. With it, the world saw the mistake. By mid-morning, the city had issued an official statement. Daniel's wrongful detainment was the result of negligence compounded by misidentification. Compensation talks began almost immediately. By noon, the number was public, $12 million. Daniel felt a strange mix of vindication and disbelief. $12 million. But the real value wasn't the money. It was the truth finally being recognized. Yet even in victory, Daniel felt hollow. The hours of fear, the public humiliation, the doubt, it couldn't be erased. He walked outside, breathing in the sharp morning air, seeing the flashing cameras and journalists following his every move. This was real life now, not just a story. A reporter called out, "Daniel, how does it feel to have justice served?" He looked straight at the lens, his voice calm but firm. "It feels like a start. For me, and hopefully for anyone who might face the same thing." Behind him, the police officers who had acted without care now whispered apologies. Mark avoided eye contact entirely, knowing that the $12 million wasn't just money. It was a symbol of accountability. Daniel's phone buzzed again. Notifications poured in. Shares, subscriptions, messages. The story had reached millions in less than a day. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight lift just enough to stand taller. He turned back to the cameras, raising a hand slightly in acknowledgement. The nightmare had ended, but the story of justice, of vigilance, and of one crucial detail, changing everything, would echo far beyond that gas station. As the sun climbed higher, Daniel knew one thing. The world had seen what happened, and no one could ignore it now. Subscribe and share. The story wasn't just his anymore. It belonged to everyone who demanded truth.